Happy spring! I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of Regulator. Welcome to this week's Regulatory Roundup. The regulator of the week is the FTC. In good news for them, they got $50 million in checks refunded to the University of Phoenix students for false advertising because the company touted all these relationships with big companies like AT&T, Yahoo, Microsoft, Twitter, etc., giving the false impression that students would be hired if they got a degree from the online school. In bad news for them, they lost a court case challenging their antitrust claim against Qualcomm, the big cell phone chip provider, and the FTC ultimately announced this week that they're dropping the case. The topic of the week is eviction moratorium. Starting with the CDC, basically putting out a formal Federal Register notice saying that evictions of tenants could be detrimental to public health control measures to slow COVID-19. This led the Office of the President into action, ensuring that all the big players like HUD, CFPB, FTC, and others are coordinating support to both tenants and landlords. According to the CFPB, more than 8 million Americans are behind on rent, and of course, it disproportionately impacts people of color. The FTC therefore provided guidance for consumers and businesses related to the moratorium, but they did issue an alert called literally a word to landlords about eviction moratorium. It goes through everything I just said, but also adds that in addition to the 90 days of non-eviction, there are procedures for tenants to put a halt on the eviction process. And to that end, landlords will be getting and expected to fill out these CDC forms. Moving on to the weed feed. New York lawmakers have come to a deal for recreational cannabis bill to go on the table. New Jersey is moving along with a new appointment to the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. Vermont is putting bills on the table that force towns to allow cannabis dispensaries in their zip codes after a certain date. In Climate Corner, Biden put out an executive order about offshore wind energy. This certainly pleased New York and New Jersey. In Compliance Corner, Biden signed a formal bill, which is now law, for bankruptcy relief. The SBA increased the loan limits for EIDL disaster loans, and the IRS allowed for more tax-deductible expenses thanks to the pandemic. Also, taxes aren't due until May 17th this year. Hooray! I know, I certainly need more time. For those of you following crypto, big fine by the CFTC. They caught a UK guy running a Bitcoin trading scheme, and he needs to pony up $571 million in fines. For those of you following cyber, the National Governors Association has been really active building resource centers for states to beef up their capabilities. And NIST is going to be hosting a workshop on cybersecurity in space, the final frontier. For those of you following diversity and inclusion, the Commerce Department has observed that in 2018, women-owned firms made up 19% of all firms that employed people in the United States. But our numbers are apparently growing. And I'm quite curious about what direction that number goes in 2020 because the current stats for ladies is not that great. But I guess we'll have to wait a few years to get it. In our Fine Tracker this week, the fun one was definitely out of the New Jersey Bureau of Securities, where the company failed to inform potential investors that they plan to use the investor funds to finance, quote, trips to gentlemen's clubs, and that such misrepresentation would probably be pretty material to an investor's decision to invest. But FINRA did report that over the last 2 months, they've observed a sharp increase in new customers opening online brokerage accounts and engaging in ACH instant funds abuse. And while this is certainly something that's been misused in the past, the recent increase appears to be correlated to this whole GameStop, Robinhood, online stonk thing. For those of you following the LIBOR transition, ARK was prolific this week, including an alert that basically said, hey, it's time, pick a rate, any rate, except for LIBOR. For those of you following privacy, NIST had a really cool article on what is now being called encounter metrics. So when you bump into someone in the workplace or at your local coffee shop, that would be an encounter. And that is formally the scientific term. And because of COVID-19, there's a whole new genre of science around encounter metrics, and it's rapidly evolving. Very cool stuff. And other fun stuff in the States, I was impressed when I saw that New Hampshire is now opening vaccines to people over 40. Then I saw New York is giving it to people over 30, but then I was really impressed by Colorado that is giving to anyone 16 and up. Interesting bill in New Hampshire. They are trying to prohibit the state from enforcing any presidential executive order that would restrict or regulate the right of people to keep and bear arms. And for my employment people out there, Wisconsin is working through a law that would prohibit mandatory vaccination for employment. That's it this week for Regulator's US Alerts. See you every Wednesday morning on LinkedIn and YouTube.